Patrons of YouTube, welcome back to the channel. It's that time of year, guys. We've come to the conclusion of 2025. As you can see, I have a little bit of swelling on my beauty mark. If you guys weren't familiar, I am a 7th grade English teacher, and I told all my students to stop saying 6, 7, and so he punched me in the face. But that's just part of the job, I guess, right? Anyways, we did this last year. We're doing it this year. Tier list, tier ranking every book I read this year. There's about 16. So let's just get into it. All right, everybody, we have a classic tier list today. We got S, A, B, C, D tier. S is the best. D is the worst. I did this on the channel last year as well. Maybe I'll leave a link to that video if I remember to do that, or if I don't feel like a lazy piece of shit. What? Okay, so oh my god. All right, big apologies, guys. I'm sorry for the curse words. It's been a long week. All right, let's get into it though. No excuses. Put the excuses to the wayside. Let's focus. All right, Agatha Christie, and then there are none. I'm gonna put it B tier. It's a fun little story, murder mystery. My first Agatha Christie book. This is a perfect like airplane book. You could finish it in like 2 hours. And I mean, that's about it. I don't want to make any over generalizations about the murder mystery genre because I'm sure there's people who push the boundaries and can do some interesting things with it. It's just, I think it's good, but not great. You're really the writing style of Agatha Christie's very very simplistic. It is majorly or not prose. The majority of the book is, you could argue, is dialogue. I'd say about 60% of the book's dialogue. Um, but you're not there to see someone, pushing the boundaries, pushing the limits of the craft of the novel or writing. You're not there for a Toni Morrison or a David Foster Wallace, or you're there to hear a neat little story. And Agatha Christie does that well. I actually made a video about this book where I go into more detail of why I think it's good but not great. So check that out. All right, next we have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, it's argued, some people would like to say that this is actually their favorite book out of the Tolkien properties. Some people say that they like this more than Lord of the Rings. I don't know if I liked it more than Lord of the Rings, but The Hobbit was really good. It's got the classic hero's journey with Bilbo. And I read this book before. I also went and left my home and entered myself into, a kind of scary environment that would leave you a little bit uneasy. So I related to Bilbo. That was part of the reason why this book, I think, hit so home, so closely, so deeply for me. Tolkien's ability to take a guy, a hobbit, your average Joe, who very much enjoys the comforts of his home, and take him out of it, and just, we get to see a lot about the human experience, I guess, or the experience of good and evil through this simple guy. The Hobbit's great. S tier. Maybe I don't have to defend that one. Maybe people understand. All right, next we have Zone One by Colson Whitehead. This is actually, did I finish that book this year? So this is actually a book that grows on me. The more distance I'm put between it. I remember when I finished Zone One and did the review, I was kind of a little, I wouldn't say harsh, but I had negative feedback. It felt like a story that kind of just really didn't go anywhere. We kind of would take a step forward, take two steps back. little bit of hopscotch back and forth, and then you get the conclusion at the end. But it's like all in the span of like 3 days, and it just I don't. It's you're there. It is literary fiction. It's literary zombie fiction. So it's how Colson Whitehead can write that draws you in. And that being the selling point makes sense because Colson Whitehead, his writing style is something that I enjoyed. It is different. I remember reading the first couple pages. It took me a minute to really settle into the story because Colson Whitehead just kind of picks you up and just like throws you right into the middle of what's happening. He doesn't really give you any context. Like, okay, we got this character. This is what he's feeling. Okay, who is this character? Why are they feeling this way? Well, you don't know that. I'm just telling you this right now. But also his mastery of the language, his like verb usage, his just exemplary vocabulary. I mean, he's just the writing part of it is great. It's almost the opposite of the book that I've put it beside here, the Agatha Christie book. While the Agatha Christie book has a very simplistic, 2+2 prose style, but the story is very rapid, moving, moving, moving. That's what keeps you in. Zone 1 is almost like, okay, not much is going to happen. We're not worried about what's actually happening, but let me describe to you, let me tell you the story in a way that the way that I'm telling it is what keeps you involved. And ultimately, I say I'll just put it in beats here. I did enjoy it, but again, I think there's that balance between your prose, your craft, your writing, the actual like writing aspect of it, and the story arcing part of it. What's happening? How am I keeping the reader invested in what is actually taking place in the story? And I think that's where Zone 1 falls short because yes, the writing is great, but what is actually happening in the story is, it's very slow. It didn't really grab me that well. On the other hand, Left Hand Darkness is the perfect blend of these two, which is why I'm putting it in S tier. Now, do I put it above The Hobbit? Yes. Okay. Basically, what I just said. Left Hand Darkness has the elegant writing style of uh, a literary person like Colson Whitehead, but also it has a story that is driven and impactful and snowballs. No pun intended, because it is a book that takes place on a snow planet. But once the plot gets moving, it gets moving, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and more things are getting put into the story and stories, or until the end, the eventual climax. But yeah, great writing, great story. Ursula K. Le Guin. It's just on the surface, it's a simple premise, right? What if you went to a planet and gender didn't exist? But she so thoroughly understands the implications of what that would mean for how society would, how a culture would develop. How would nations interact with each other? How would the politics work? How would she considers all of that, puts all of it into the story, and it just shows how truly uh, attention to detail, how thoroughly Ursula K. Le Guin went into the ramifications of such a thing, if that were to be the case, and someone from our point of view, our perspective, came into it. Jesus, uh, great book. Top of the list. On Writing by Stephen King is half of a writing advice, writing instruction book, half of a memoir. The memoir was actually, I was pretty interested in the memoir, getting to learn about the life of Stephen King, and obviously he has a knack for writing, so he makes telling the story of his life pretty interesting. And then the actual writing advice, I found this book actually did motivate me a lot of the time to get up and write, because I feel like the main takeaway I had from the Stephen King on writing book was at the end of the day, I can give you all this advice, I can try to lead you in the right direction, but you just have to write. At the end of you can't just do the storyboarding, do the world building in your head, writing the outlines. At the end of the day, you just have to write. That's how you get there. You have to write. I took that away, and it actually did motivate me to try to get a writing routine down. And I did have one for a while before, the whole shadow government business. But there was some things I disagreed with what he said. Obviously, take that with a grain of salt because Stephen King is a best-selling author, and I'm a guy in a one-bedroom apartment. But there was some things I don't know. Stephen King talks about how he thinks maybe the level of entry to writing isn't hard, but like actually becoming good or great. It feels like sometimes the way he put it, it feels like it is dependent on just natural talent, right? He says a good writer can elevate to a great writer, but a bad writer can only elevate to maybe a below average writer. And I'm not sure how much I agree with that notion on writing. And I feel like that's a great place to end that review. Next, we have the Hunger Games. Now, obviously, the Hunger Games was the progenitor. Is that even a word, man? The Hunger Games was what started the young adult dystopian genre. Hunger Games came out, and then you had Divergent. Then you had all these other copies. Okay, maybe copies is a bit burlesque or whatever, brutal, but the Hunger Games is what started all the young adult dystopian because it had done it so well, and people wanted to mimic that success. And this was actually a book that I read the second half of first because I came into a long term position, and with my students, they were reading the Hunger Games before I got there, so I had to finish it with them, and then I went back before we wrapped up and read the first half. And yeah, I mean it's great, great world building. The writing, uh, it gets to the point. It's more workman than poet, of course, but and I think character as well. I mean, especially at the end, you have this girl who is young and she just went through a very traumatic thing, and she's feeling torn now that she's coming home between a guy that she may have not ever had feelings for if it wasn't for the situation they were put in. And it is really a great read. It's an S tier for sure. And does it go above The Hobbit? So, what was more influential on their genre? The Hunger Games to young adult dystopia, or The Hobbit to fantasy? You could write a dissertation on that. Next, we have Beloved. This is another S tier. Sorry, I feel like I'm putting everything in S tier, but Beloved may most likely be my book of the year. Like the praises I gave to Ursula K. Le Guin, Toni Morrison, the perfect blend between prosaic poet artistry to the actual craft of writing and the actual story that is taking place. This is a book that I didn't realize was magical realism until I did some research into the genre of magical realism because I was interested. I'd heard someone use the term online, and I wasn't familiar what it meant. And then this book is most certainly magical realism. I mean, Haruki Murakami would be jealous. The Beloved is a great story, and you have this character who's almost the embodiment of grief. And by the end of the book, you do come to that magical realist realization that this character might not have even existed the whole time. You could pluck this character out of the story, and it would have made sense. The story sort of would have still progressed in the way that it should have if you took this character and what they stood for and instead baked it into the characters. But no, Toni Morrison makes this grief, turns it into its own character interacting with our cast. And you have the post antebellum southern setting. You have dialogue that just feels real. Um, Great read. I mean, seriously, Beloved. It is very good. I promise I mean that. I know I'm yawning, but Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan will be going in the B tier, as well as Raymond E. Feist, Magician Master, and Raymond E. Feist, Magician Apprentice. Now, whoa, Bookman, you just read all these at once. That's because these books are pretty similar to me. Um, they both are fantasy books, and you could say Magician Master is more epic fantasy. Age of Myth is more high fantasy because there's more races, but both hit the fantasy tropes that I enjoy, and they do the fantasy thing well. I don't think they do the fantasy thing great, but they do the fantasy thing well, and that's why they've been put into B tier. Now, for Michael J. Sullivan, I would like to read his Royce and Hadrian books because I've heard that those are his his widely acclaimed ones are pretty well done. So I do own one that he signed for me. Thank you very much, Michael J. Sullivan. I'll need to read that. And the same thing with the Remedy Feist books. Again, they're decent fantasy. Um, and I put Magician Master over Magician Princess because it really is just one large book that got split into two. Sort of like what they did with the Lord of the Rings, but except for they split that book into three. But how book one ends like this tragic thing happens to our cast and they're separated. And it's very detrimental to their goals, and the book just ends. And Magician and Princess is the same way, it just ends. And then book two picks right back up where book two just left, or book one just left off. So really, it's just one big book. Whereas I like the second half of the book more than the first half of the book. So that's why I put Master above A Princess. All right, No Country for Old Men's also in S tier. Um, man, where do I put it though? The Hobbit at the bottom of S tier? Is that allowed? Can I do that? Nah, but I'll put it at the bottom of S tier. No, No Country for Old Men is minimalism at its best. Yeah, No Country for Old Men. We very compelling characters here. Very well thought out characters, and very much in the way of Hemingway. You know, Cormac McCarthy's not going to tell you everything about these characters. You have to do some of the legwork yourself. But once you do it, it's very satisfying because you keep getting deeper. You keep digging deeper, and you go through more rereads. Which I have not read this book, but I could imagine on a reread, you would discover even more things about these characters, right? Because Cormac McCarthy never tells you anything about the character unless it's through an action they performed or through something they said to somebody, which is why these books are like maybe that big. They're pretty slim, but they're loaded with meaning and theme, and I could go on, but No Country for Old Men, my first Cormac McCarthy, and I did like it very much. Pet Cemetery is going to be an S tier. We'll put it. I'll put it A, top of A. I don't know if I'd put it S, but yeah, so Stephen King leans more towards impactful story than impactful writing. Although I do enjoy his writing style, it's very easy to consume and get through his works. I thought the same thing about The Shining. Pet Cemetery is, I wouldn't say your traditional horror. There's no big bad monster, right? The real big bad monster is grief, and is maybe you could say human fragility. The option to right a wrong that the universe did to you. Do you take it? Is that the right thing to do? Will there be consequences? Of course. But yeah, uh, great book, Pet Cemetery. If you have kids, I don't have kids, but I imagine if you do have kids, this book's probably terrifying. Uh, but I enjoyed this version of horror. It does have sort of a climactic ending like The Shining, but The Shining's more like oogie boogie monster under your bed ghost story. But the end of Pet Cemetery is more just like, wow. Sometimes when you get stuck in a downward loop, it's you just keep going. It's very hard to get out of. But yeah, Pet Cemetery is great. Yeah, Crossroads of Twilight's D tier. If I try to take this objectively, which is hard to do in a series, right? Because how do I read this book objectively when I already have the context of what's happened before? What I mean by that is I already have a fondness for these characters. So when you get books like Crossroads of Twilight, where not much happens at all, I wonder if the crutch of us already enjoying these characters in this world that Robert Jordan has built carries this book so heavily that it can even be published. Um, that's very outlandish to say. Maybe not to that extent, but I guess what I'm saying is Crossroads of Twilight is a book that like not anything. It's sort of like similar to Zone One. Crossroads of Twilight, the book takes place in about 3 days to like a week, 2 weeks after the events of Winter's Heart. And Robert Jordan himself said he liked to, sometimes test and work with time, how time worked in his book. So I think with Crossroads of Twilight, he was saying, what could I do with a book that only took place in a week after the last one? Like what all could I put into a week? And yeah, it wasn't good. There is moments where Robert Jordan's like, wow, he could have been a very talented horror writer, you know. But again, I think um, if I didn't appreciate these characters or this world the way I do, this book, I don't know if I would have been able to finish it. But I'm here because I love the characters and I know where Robert Jordan is going with the very slow pacing and the very slow character building. But at the end of the day, you do all this. This feels very much like a setup book, which is crazy to say. What? Bookman, a whole book just for setting up the next one and the next one? Yes, that's what Crossroads of Twilight felt like. And while we're on the Wheel of Time, let's do Winter's Heart. Winter's Heart was an A for me. I don't remember much from Winter's Heart off the top of my head, but I do remember enjoying it and getting through it, pretty fast once I hit the halfway point. It didn't really feel much like a slog to me. I do have a review for. I should have a review for all these books on the channel, so I'll try to drop links for them as we go, but probably won't. Maybe I'll make a playlist. Who knows? Winter's Heart had the classic Wheel of Time ending, where the ending was pretty like marquee. We got this crazy thing going on. Rand's cleaning the male half of the source. Spoilers, sorry, but and I think there was moments along the way of Winter's Heart that I also enjoyed. So I'd put it A. Most Wheel of Time books are pretty good for me. Um, the Old Man in the Sea is going to the Old Man in the Sea tier, which is which is that has to be heresy to put a Hemingway book so low. But sort of like with what I was mentioning with the Cormac McCarthy minimalism earlier, when I read The Sun Also Rises, it felt very similar. Where on rereads, I would imagine you would derive even more information out of these characters because Hemingway, like McCarthy, uh, you know, he tells your characters who they are by how they act, their actions, and how they speak to people, their dialogue. And with the sun also rises. I imagine it like my backyard, and I'm digging. And I can keep digging. I keep finding good stuff, right? I keep digging, keep finding like more jewels, right? The Old Man in the Sea felt like I was digging, and then I just hit bedrock. I don't know. Maybe this book is lost on me because I'm not the demographic for it. Maybe when I'm an older man, if I'm lucky to get to that point, I can reread it and maybe I'll understand these themes and this character more. But right now, it didn't really work for me, so that's why it's in C tier. Honestly, probably D tier. I'd put on the same list. Crossroads of Twilight. Then the last one we have here is Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. Or Heinlein. Robert Heinlein? Yeah, I think that's it. I'd put it A tier. I forgot I'm supposed to be ranking these. I would put it above Winter's Heart. I'd probably put On Riding at the bottom. I'd probably put, yeah, and then There Were None Over Zone 1. Yeah. Um, Starship Troopers is kind of about fascism, maybe. But again, even if I don't agree with a certain policy or, I don't know, governmental structure or perspective on civilization, whatever, I always find it interesting to read from other opinions, from opposing opinions, right? Because I'll just become more a well-rounded person to understand where they are coming from, to become maybe more considerate through that. But Starship Troopers, I also read this while uh, I was also on a neighboring planet, killing about 6 to 8 foot large praying mantis monsters. So I related there. But no, honestly, it was a good book. I can't remember much from it right now. I just remember, there was the whole aspect where you have to serve in the military to get the right to become a citizen to vote. And there was some interesting dialogue there. Also, there's very interesting dialogue on the purpose of war, right? Our main character, Johnny Rico, he's talking to, I think, one of his commanders or one of his professors, one of his higher ups, and he's like, I don't understand. If we have these nuclear bombs that can just atomize entire planets, why are we still putting foots on the ground? Why is there still a mobile infantry? And our Professor Commander character is like, listen, sometimes, when a baby acts up, you're not going to cut its head off, right? You're going to smack its hand. That's what the infantry's for. When people get out of line, we smack their hand. And I found that pretty interesting because that was a similar question I had, before I really looked into the affairs of military and warfare. But yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you all for watching. Sorry if I was lacking the energy. Um, I just sold some of my blood on the black market. That might have something to do with it. But yeah, my book of the year, Beloved by Toni Morrison. Of course, a lot of great books beside it. Left Hand Darkness, Hunger Games, Hobbit, No Country for Old Men, Pet Cemetery. Only read a few stinkers, but reading bad books is just as important as reading good books, especially someone who's an aspiring writer, because you want to know with the bad books, you want to understand why you don't like them. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. Merry Christmas.